All right, so today only, because usually you guys can sit wherever you want, but today only I need you guys that are sitting in the back row to come sit in a seat. We need everybody to be actually in rows to make this class work. Thanks for that. And also today, usually I let everybody use their screens for whatever reason, but today we're going to need no screens, because what I'm going to tell you is very sensitive information that I don't want anybody to actually record on the screen. So you're going to put your laptops away and your phones away. And the reason is we're going to talk about ethical dilemmas in ethnobiology. I don't want some of this information to get out. So for our eyes and ears only. Before I start, just a reminder that your botanical garden worksheets are due on Friday. So bring those into lab. And you have two options, right? You can either go to Foster's or you can go to Lion. You don't have to do both. You can choose one or the other. They're both equally as difficult, easy, fun, extraordinary. You can do both if you want to, but there's no reason. Any questions about that? Yeah. Anybody do the Foster garden one yet? How long did it take you guys?
Hour and a half.
Sounds about right. Any other questions or comments on that? Awesome. Okay, well, so without further ado, today I'm going to tell you about some of my own adventures in ethnobotany and some of the ethical dilemmas that I faced. And what you're looking at is a picture of the island of Mypos, where I did some work between the time of graduating as an undergraduate and getting my PhD. I spent some time as an ethnobotanist hunting out new pharmaceutical drugs based on plants that were being used by the indigenous people on the island of Mypos. And I worked with this group known as the Zorbat Islanders. If you guys could actually, today, if you could sit in the actual seats rather than in the back row, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. So, I lived with this group for a while, especially with this one particular tribe known as the Zorbat Islanders that live there. And it's an indigenous group. It's been there for about 1,000 years and have a very rich and extraordinary pharmacopoeia that they utilize. And it's a shamanic culture. And so I worked very closely with a number of their shamans doing interviews, just like you guys are going to do with your families, and learning about their plants. And I want to tell you about some of the case studies that resulted from this work. So the first case study that I'm going to talk about that presented me with an ethical dilemma was this time that I found the cure for cancer. And so I was studying with these Zorgat Islanders in the island of Mypos, and I was working with this one shaman. And he showed me this sacred medicinal plant that grows in an area, and they prepare this plant in a special way, and it's long and involved and involves a number of steps. And they use this plant to treat sore throats and broken bones. If you have a sore throat or a broken bone, they take this plant and they do some stuff and produce this medicine, right? And so the plant is actually sacred to them. So they think that the medicine was a gift from the gods. And so they're very protective of this plant. And so the shaman is sort of the intermediary who's able to get permission from their god to allow this plant to be used and to heal people for broken bones and for sore throats. So I'd been working with him for a while, so he allowed me to take some of that material back to my lab here at UH, and we extracted some of the compounds from that plant, and we sent it down to the cancer center down in Kaka'ako. They did a bunch of analyses on it, and they figured out that I'd found a cure for cancer, which was remarkable, right? So odds are that almost everybody in this room probably knows somebody who either died of cancer or maybe overcame cancer. It kills 8 million people a year, right? So it's one of the biggest killers on the planet. Not quite as big as malaria, but it's still a very, very sad and pervasive disease, right? So finding a cure for cancer was remarkable. And needless to say, we were pretty excited, right? So we were very excited about saving 8 million lives every year. And so I went back to the island of Mypos, and I said to the shaman, explained to him our research and what we discovered and how many lives we could save. And so I asked him for permission to use this plant, right, to take it back to UH and maybe synthesize some of those compounds and create this cure for cancer. And the shaman thought long and hard about it and said, well, the issue is that if we have too many people have access to this plant, then the gods will be upset and it won't work for us anymore. So they'll make it so that using this plant no longer cures sore throats and broken bones on the island of Mypos. And it's very important to us, so we don't want to release this plant for you to derive this cure for cancer, right? So I was posed with this ethical dilemma. On the one hand, I'd found a cure for cancer, which is a very serious disease that's afflicted my family numerous times. And I could save so many lives. On the other hand, I had the trust of this shaman and this group that I've been working with for so long, and I didn't want to betray their trust, right? So I found myself with this ethical dilemma. Now here's what I want you guys to do. I'm going to present 3 case studies today based on my fictional work. In case you didn't guess, I didn't actually go to the island of Mypos and find a cure for cancer. I just made that up. But I want you to pretend that you're in these types of circumstances. I want each of you to pair up with somebody else. And if you are an odd number, you can go in a group of 3. And I want you to discuss what you would do. And I want you to take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to talk about how you would treat this dilemma, right? Would you say to this shaman from this fictitious island that, I believe you, I believe your culture, and I think that it's important to respect you, but it's more important to save 8 million lives every year and come up with this cure for cancer? Or would you say, okay, what you say goes, this is your knowledge that I co-opted, and if you say that we can't take this drug and save all these lives because we want to cure broken bones and sore throats, then I respect that, and I'll respect your wishes, right? It's a tough call. So pair up. I'll give you guys 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll report back about what you decided to do as an ethnobotanist. Go ahead, everybody, find a partner. I'll help you. If you can't find them on your own. Oh, sure. All right. Well, I'm sure it was a heated discussion, and I'm sure it was hard to come up with the right decision, right? Because there's lots of factors that you have to weigh. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys decided cancer sucks, so we're going to cure cancer? Okay. And how many of you guys decided, despite how much cancer sucks, we're going to respect the wishes of this indigenous group and the shaman? Okay, fewer of you. How many of you guys weren't able to really come to any decision at all? You're either a hung jury or just was too complex to figure out in 2 minutes. Fair enough. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I made this up, right? This didn't actually happen to me or anyone that I know. But we find ourselves, we being ethnobotanists, find ourselves in this type of dilemma not infrequently. And I'll talk about one sort of famous case that actually did happen a number of years ago. And this involved a researcher from the University of Georgia named Brent Berlin, who was actually he was like one of my ethnobotany heroes. So he was one of the guys that when I first became interested in this field, I read one of his books and I was so blown away by his work that I was inspired to pursue this path. And this was before this controversy broke out. And he worked with this group known as the Tzeltal in Maya. He worked mostly in Chiapas. He did some work in Belize also, and sort of that part of the world, Central America and Northern America, I guess, with Mexico. So he'd been working with this particular group for about 40 years when this controversy broke out. And he got a big grant from, I think it was from the National Science Foundation, to work with this Mayan group in Mexico and to study the ethnobotany, especially their medicines, right? And so part of this deal was that he had a collaborator that was a Welsh pharmaceutical company that was going to do some of the chemical analyses of the plants, right? So his job is he was going in, he was doing a lot of interviews. He's really interested in linguistics, so how people name plants. But he was also collecting plants, and to sort of make it profitable, he was going to mine some of these plants for biochemistry. So he realized that there was going to be money involved and that there was the potential that maybe some drugs were going to be discovered. And so he formed a local NGO called Pro-Maya to share any profits. So it was an NGO. NGO stands for non-governmental organizations. This is what we call these aid agencies that work around the world, but that aren't associated with a government. So the Nature Conservancy is an example of an NGO. Red Cross is another example, something that's non-governmental organization that typically does aid work or conservation work. So he formed a local group it was made of local people that were, their job was to take money from this project and give it back to the community in culturally appropriate ways, whatever that might have been. Now, and Brent Berlin himself donated about $30,000 of his own money initially to get this NGO started, to pay salaries and pay for overhead and office space and stuff. So before they started, they wrote up this sharing agreement wherein most of the profits, these are hypothetical profits because the odds of actually discovering a drug are very low, and then the odds of actually discovering a drug and then going through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, having something FDA approved and actually marketed and making that profitable is just like, it's like a 1 in a million thing. It just very, very rarely happens. Of all the drugs that we have available to us in prescriptions, there's millions of others that never make it that far for one reason or another. So they thought, although it was rare, they wrote up this agreement that if something, if they were to hit gold and say find a cure for cancer, about 15% of the proceeds would go back to University of Georgia, who was employing Brent Berlin and paid for his time to write this grant and stuff. That's pretty typical. About 5% would go to this NGO, Pro-Maya, which would distribute the funds back to the community. And the rest, which would be about 80%, would go to the pharmaceutical company. Now, maybe that sounds unfair, maybe that sounds fair, it's just how it is. The pharmaceutical company has to spend a lot of money on research and development, they have a lot of fancy equipment, PhDs, so most of the money is going to go to them. It's a risky thing because it's very unlikely that they'll actually make any profits anyway. So that's what they agreed upon, and that's how they wrote it up. Now, they had to do, just like we talked about on Monday, they had to do an informed consent. So to pass their internal, their IRB panel at UGA, so in order to be cleared to work with human subjects, they had to come up with a way of informing this community, risks, rewards, and optionality of participating in this research that involves humans, right? And so this community is mostly illiterate, so most people don't read and write. So it wouldn't have been appropriate to have like a sheet of paper that spelled it all out and have people sign it, right? So instead, they got a little bit creative and decided that they were going to have a theater troupe, a local theater troupe, sort of act out the plan for this research project and then the cost sharing at the end. And so they had this traveling theater group that went around all these villages and sort of acted it out so that people could understand. And this was in sort of their wisdom and knowledge of this culture. This was a good way to get the word out, where print and like radio ads wouldn't have done it, right, or no internet, right? So they started doing. Oh, and I should mention that in this play that they made, they didn't mention this cost sharing agreement. And they left it out intentionally because they didn't want to raise false expectations that they were going to make money, right? They just thought that it was so unlikely that that was going to happen that they didn't include that in this informed consent. Instead, they talked about the benefits being, recording traditional knowledge, having people come in and record this for them and sharing that among all the different villagers and other deliverables. And they didn't talk about drug discoveries because they thought that it was unlikely to happen. Turns out that was a big mistake. First, there was rumors that went around that these people were making a lot of money off of knowledge that was contained in this village, or among this culture. They got the idea that other people, were profiting off of their knowledge and they weren't getting any money for it. They got very, very upset, and they eventually kicked Brent Berlin out of their village. He'd been working there for 40 years, and didn't allow him back in. And they had to cut this research project short. He sort of left the field in a bit of a cloud of shame. Unfortunately, he had a long, illustrious career, and he left this sort of a bit of an embarrassment because he'd been sort of made this critical mistake with informed consent in this community. So one of the repercussions of this work was that people sort of around the world became very distrustful of researchers coming in and examining plants, especially with the promise of making medicine, because the idea was that people were going to steal ideas from local cultures, make profits, bring them back to the Western world, to the United States, take all those profits for themselves and not give it back to communities. It also led to this false expectation that there actually was a lot of monetary value in indigenous knowledge of plants, and that if you were an indigenous community that uses plants for medicine, that you were sitting on a gold mine, that could be worth millions and millions of dollars. And I'm not saying that local knowledge isn't important and isn't valuable, it just can't necessarily be monetized in that way. But this whole project and this debacle created this false expectation. One of the fallouts of this project was that a lot of countries then enacted very strict laws and regulations about the type of research that can be conducted in their countries. So to this day, it's almost impossible to go to Brazil and to do research in Brazil and to export plants out of Brazil, particularly to the United States, because they're very concerned that unscrupulous, unethical ethnobotanists will go steal plants and steal knowledge and take money away from local people and from that country. So there are a lot of different ethical issues that go into it. So one of the things that I want you to consider is not just, I think curing cancer is a very noble cause, right? So you might think, well, I'll do this for the greater good, even though this poor island nation might get sort of screwed over by my actions. But you also have to think about the reputation, about your reputation, about the reputation of the field as a whole, about the reputation of science. Because if you break that trust and act unethically in one circumstance, then word gets out around the world, right? It makes it much harder to go conduct ethical research elsewhere, because scientists then will develop this reputation of being unscrupulous. Let that be a warning. Okay, case study number 2. A little bit less heavy, right? So this time we're not talking about a cure for cancer. We're going to talk about a cure for baldness. This is Kelly Slater, who's so relieved that they finally found one. So I went back to Mypos and talked to the Zorgat Islander, and I discovered that these islanders had found a way to cure baldness, which is another affliction that's very near and dear to my heart personally, right? So it turns out this is a remedy that's really well known on the island. Sort of everybody knows it, just like we use aloe vera to treat sunburns. Everybody there knows that you use this one plant to treat baldness, right? It's common knowledge. My buddy wasn't a shaman, he was just some dude. Took me out one day, showed me where to find the plant and how to turn it into this remedy to cure my own baldness. And so I learned how to do it. He learned this technique from his dad, who learned it from his brother, who learned about it at some medicinal plant workshop organized by a village elder who's since passed away. So my point being, this knowledge is very much in the public domain on this island, right? So sorry. I came back to the United States and I started talking to the Hair Club for Men, which is one of these organizations that you find on late night TV where they're trying to sell you bottles of stuff for $50 a pop. And they got real excited. And so they told me that they would buy my remedy for $10 million, right? Because a lot of bald people willing to spend $50 on a bottle of a cure, right? So that sounds great. I'm on board. Everybody on the island's on board. They're like, yeah, sure, take the plant, develop it into a cure for baldness. And being an ethical ethnobotanist that I am, I wanted to figure out an equitable way, a fair way to share this money with this island, right, with the people on it. So $10 million in my pocket. I fly back to the island of Mypos, and I come up with a plan to share this money with them. How do I go about doing that? So go back to your partners or your group and talk about what sort of cost-sharing plan you would come up with to share this $10 million with the island of Mypos, or not. What is their currency? Is it equal?
was good to share what I learned
All right. Is anybody particularly proud of their solution that they want to share with the rest of the group? Did they come up with anything really innovative? What did you guys do?
Alright, so we decided on that, like, we take a profit. We would take a small profit for ourselves and then give the rest back to the community there and like to the island. And so hopefully that would make it like fair for them because it's really like their money. Like we just like made it known. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
who would you like physically give the suitcase of cash to?
like for me like I'm not really like sure like if you were to give it some in cash or give it some like what could I offer for you guys in like services or something. But yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Good idea. It's very ethical of you. So I'll talk about the one. There's many examples that I could use. We'll talk about one pretty well-known case study where something like this sort of happened. So this is a plant. This is actually in the Plumeria family, which is sort of wild. This is a plant known as Hoodia. That's the genus. There's a few species. And this is actually a traditional plant used by the San Bushmen in Namibia, so in southern Africa, as an appetite suppressant. So that's how they use it. So it's a hunting-gathering group. They don't always, food's not always abundant, right? So sometimes they go for a long time without eating. They can chew on this plant, and it actually suppresses their appetite long enough until they get their next meal, so that they're not, hangry all the time. South Africa's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, which is their national science foundation, patented its use as a diet suppressant in 1997. But they did it in sort of a sneaky way. They didn't acknowledge this tribe that had the knowledge of the plant. They just sort of took the plant, said, "Oh, it grows in South Africa, so we're going to appropriate it and patent it for ourselves." They began this sort of long, bitter battle with the pharmaceutical company Pfizer that South Africa sold the rights to. It was very long and drawn out, and the plan was that Pfizer was actually going to add it to Slim Fast shakes. I'm not making this up. They were going to add it to these nutrition shakes for people that were trying to diet so that they wouldn't want to eat, right? So you drink a shake and then you wouldn't be hungry anymore. Finally, they agreed that something like 8% of the profits from the sale of one species of Hoodia would go back to an organization, would go back to a fund that would buy back land for the San Bushmen, that would buy back land that had been essentially seized by white settlers when South Africa was founded by the Dutch, however long ago. So they were going to take proceeds from this plant and buy back land that San Bushmen could go live their traditional lifestyle on. So the deal wasn't very well written out. One of the issues was that it only covered the sale of extracts. So if you're going to extract this enzyme from Hoodia and add it to Slim Fast shakes, that would be covered. But if you just took the plant itself and say ground it up or took the juice from the plant, that wouldn't be covered. So people just sort of went around that and started selling bulk hoodia products. So you could go online and you could buy, however many grams of dried hoodia and sort of use it yourself. And they didn't get any money for that. It wasn't marketable, and so they finally gave up on this plan to bring it to market in 2008. When all was said and done, only about $100,000 was ever actually received by the Sen Bushmen. But even this was difficult to distribute, and it created a lot of infighting among various tribes who all claimed responsibility and knowledge of this plan. So even the small amount of money created a lot of conflict and power jostling to decide who ought to get that $100,000 and where land ought to be purchased, right? So a couple issues come up, even when you're trying to do the right thing and give money back to a community. A few things to consider, right? First of all, money, whether we like it or not, is power, right? So if some people or person in a community gets more of it than somebody else, it's going to create hierarchies that are maybe unintentional. It's going to reinforce existing hierarchies if someone in power seizes money from somebody else. If you're all of a sudden bringing in $5 million or $10 million into a community that's largely living a subsistence lifestyle and doesn't have much money, it's going to really throw things for a loop, right? It'll disrupt traditional livelihoods. When Ashley came in and talked about agroforestry in Vanuatu and in Fiji, you remember one of the things that she mentioned was the shift away from traditional agriculture towards eating things like white bread and corned beef and spam, right? And what that did was led to all sorts of issues with diabetes and obesity, and it was really starting to kill people. And so you can imagine if all of a sudden you dump a bunch of money, people don't have to go out and work anymore, they don't have to farm, they don't have to hunt, they don't have to fish, so they can sit around and just use their money to buy tinned meat. It'll affect their health in some pretty negative ways, right? So giving money to communities isn't always the best thing. You can spend that money instead on infrastructure, right? On schools and on bridges, things that we think of as sort of indisputably good things. But all of that has its own cultural context, right? So what we see as sort of worthwhile things to spend money on, like education, might produce a system of winners and losers in a culture, right, that don't share our values. So I'm not saying there's no good way to do it, I'm just saying it can be really tough, and even giving back to a community can be a difficult thing to do correctly. You also have to realize that money will lead to all sorts of other issues as well. So we see this in where I lived in Nepal, where people all of a sudden started getting access to money, to not just to crops and to yaks, and to livestock, but actual money from things like tourism. Plastic and trash soon follows, and so a lot of these really beautiful scenic villages just started becoming trash heaps because all of a sudden they have these new materials that were enabled by actual money that they didn't have before. So not to depress you guys, I think there probably is a good way to share money equitably with other cultures, with other groups. It's not so easy as it sounds, right? There's a lot of issues that go along with that. I'm depressed. Why don't we talk about our plan of the day? So, does anybody know what this is? Say again? The candle nut? No, it looks sort of like a kukui, but it's not very closely related either. Anybody else have any idea? So the common name is the monkey pot, and that's actually the reason why I chose this plant, because I think the name is so cool. It grows, it forms these pots. This is in the Brazil nut family. It's Lycithus pisonis. And we have these hard nuts. And inside these nuts are these little nutlets, or these little seeds that grow around in a circle like that. This grows especially in South America, like in the Amazon. And monkeys actually do like to eat it. But there's this parable about a wise monkey and a silly monkey. So the wise monkey will go to the monkey pot and will take these seeds one by one, and will eat them. They're edible seeds. People can eat them too if you roast them. But the silly monkey will get greedy, and will stick its hand in the pot all at once, grab all the nuts, and because it's sort of shaped like a cup, its hand will get stuck, and it won't be able to pull its hand out. I don't think that actually happens in real life, but it's the parable that's written about this monkey pot. So it's monkey pot, not monkey pod, right? Monkey pod are these big legume trees that grow all over parks in Honolulu. The monkey pot is this one that grows in only a couple places on campus that I know. I'll pass this around. Yeah, those are the monkey pods, exactly. The sticky things that stick to your shoes. And here's the pot. I don't think it doesn't mess with things. There you go. You see some of the seeds. Let's get those like.
Oh, yeah.
Here's some of the seeds. That's the one with that one. So, any question about any of the ethical dilemmas that we've talked about so far, or the plan for the day? All right, you guys are all, yeah.
Could you speak a little bit of about like how we're genetically modifying plants?
Oh, genetically modified plants. Yeah, that's a big ethical dilemma, and we're going to devote an entire class to that next month.
Okay.
I have a lot to say about that. Stay tuned.
So do I.
Any other questions about ethical dilemmas or monkey pots? All right, then I will present our very last case study of the day. You guys have all been good sports. So saving the last truffula tree, right? We found it. So, and it grows on Zorgat Island, interestingly enough. So on this island where I was working, it turns out that there's a pretty sizable U.S. military base. So we have a big army presence over there, and it's walled off, it's sort of gated off, and they actually have some native forest that's gated off also from the community. So technically, villagers aren't allowed on base. They're not allowed in this forest or anywhere else. But there's a small group of people from this village nearby. Occasionally, they sneak into the base to collect palm thatch for the roofs of their houses, right? Because it's a nice habitat that's not very picked over. So they climb the fence, they sneak into the forest, and they collect palm thatch, and then sneak back over and go back to their villages. So I've been working with this group for a couple of years, interviewing them about NTFPs and the types of resources that they collect. And one of these guys was telling me about the fact that they sneak on the base, and he pulls out his cell phone and shows me this photo. He's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, the spot where we go, we found this truffula tree growing there." I was like, "No way, truffula trees are extinct. I read the Lorax. I know how that ended." He's like, No. There's another truffula tree. We found it, and here's the proof." And so he shows me on his phone this photo of the truffula tree that's growing on base. Everybody thought that this tree was extinct, and apparently this is the only tree left in the world, right? And it's a great tree. You can take the seeds and make thneeds, and thneeds are a thing that everyone needs, right? You guys know the book. So we need these truffula trees. Unfortunately, it turns out that the military is planning a live munitions training operation in the forest. They're going to test out some new, missiles. And so that part of the forest is probably going to be destroyed, and that tree is probably going to be killed, right? Unless I spill the beans and tell the military not to do this live munitions trial because there's a truffula tree growing there. The thing is, I can't tell them that without revealing that these villagers are poaching on base, and the guy will get in trouble and maybe arrested and sent to jail. So he says, "Well, don't say anything. I'm sad for the tree, but don't say anything because I'll get into a lot of trouble and get arrested and sent to jail." So what do you do? So here's an ethical dilemma, right? Do you sort of rat out this village and explain to the military that yeah, they're poaching on base, but don't worry about that. We have to save the truffle tree. It's the last one on Earth. Or do you just let this tree go extinct and respect the villagers' wishes? Don't get sneaky on this one. Everybody always tries to find some loophole where you can write an anonymous letter or come up with some way to tell them about this tree without ratting out the villagers. But that's not the point. You have to just listen to me. You have to, if you're going to tell them, you have to tell the military that these guys were sneaking on their base. There's no other way around it. Okay. So take a couple minutes and decide what you're going to do. All right, so as always, people try to come up with a sneaky way out. It's like, oh, well, you could just go climb the fence and then say that you found the tree and that way you get in trouble and not the villagers. But the point is it's an ethical dilemma, right? So you have to make a tough decision, not just think your way out of it. So how many people would save the tree? Okay, how many people would save the village and forget about the tree? And how many people chose Plan C? What was Plan C?
We said that go into the U.S. military since you're a United States citizen and you're a botanist from the United States.
Okay.
Just go in and be like, we need to survey all your trees. I don't know what you guys got before you destroy it, and then.
Okay. What if it was like Black Ops though? What if it was like Blackwater that had some secret base there? It doesn't actually look military. Black tree. Yeah. Okay, good plan. But you guys had a plan C too? You guys have some alternative, I'll learn in the back. Did you have a different?
Not really. It was basically go in there, see if you can steal the tree, but the problem came on if you can germinate the tree without another tree.
Right. Yeah, you need more than one tree. That's the thing about truffle is. Yeah, how did you guys find?
Technically, you don't have to have this entire village in village agree on one scapegoat essentially.
Okay.
I snuck in, I did this, and it would be like, just him, we don't know about it.
Okay, the guy that nobody likes. Alright, anything else anybody came up with?
Can you breed the tree in some way?
Absolutely. I have no idea.
Both sides.
Sure, we can do whatever we want to, 'cause it's all on my head. But anyway, so I hope this was sort of fun, and I just wanted to get you guys thinking as you are starting to conduct your own ethnobotanical research for your final project. Think about some of the ethical implications, maybe not for your final project, but for real life applications of ethnobotany. Sort of what goes into making this awesome. Thanks a lot. We'll see you on Monday.